A Fox News propagandist went on about a minute-long unhinged tirade in which she was visibly livid and jerky with rage, first ranting about the Maine Secretary of State who kicked Donald Trump off the ballot after determining that he was a constitutionally ineligible insurrectionist. And then she demanded that the United States Supreme Court rule unanimously in Trump's favor, hissing that those who don't deserve their seats at all. Pretty weird stuff. But before we unpack all that, if you haven't yet, please hit that like, subscribe, and the alert bell. All right, folks, got a couple of clips to look at here. Listen, it's no secret that the Fox Propaganda Network employs an entire rogues gallery. And I say rogues gallery because that's a term we typically associate with comic book villains. And it's appropriate because that's basically what Fox News anchors and hosts are. Just a wide array of MAGA cultists and unhinged personalities, with the exception of, again, Jessica Tarlov and maybe Neil Cavuto. Even Brett Baer, somebody who's supposedly a hard news guy. He's showing his cards more. He's openly sympathetic to Donald Trump in a way that he is simply not with people on the other side of the aisle. And then you have somebody like Dagen McDowell. Dagen McDowell might be the weirdest one currently employed by the Fox Propaganda Network. She was the subject of a previous video of mine in which she just tarred and feathered an entire generation, Gen Z, because of a TikTok trend at the time. Well, she's back and she's got a hot take about, Donald Trump's constitutional eligibility or ineligibility. And we're going to play it and unpack it together. But brace yourselves because it's weird stuff and she's clearly not well.
Bureaucrats, as you talk about this particular Secretary of State in Maine, clearly has not been treated for the derangement syndrome that a lot of people on the left are still suffering from. And also maybe, and I'm joking, just to be clear, has a delusional syndrome about seeing herself as a single Supreme Court justice who can just decide as an individual what Section 3 stands for. But in terms of the Supreme Court, it better be a 9-0 ruling.
Exactly.
It better be 9-0, because if any of those justices vote to remove Trump from the ballot, they do not deserve to sit on that bench. They do not deserve to adjudicate traffic violations. They don't deserve to sit on a park bench if they go the wrong way on.
So what I find funny about this is you have Dagen McDowell, who I don't know if she has any real legal background. I know Jeanine Pirro on the Fox Propaganda Network does, but otherwise she's a Fox News host and she's entitled to her opinion, as we all are. But what I find funny about it is the Maine Secretary of State apparently has no business making a decision on this, but Dagen McDowell apparently does, or at least those who are in the Supreme Court should rule and are only allowed to rule the way in which Dagen McDowell opines. It's very strange. No, you can't decide on this. You're not qualified. How dare you? But also you all better do what I say, even though I'm not a Secretary of State and I'm not a Supreme Court justice. So again, the double standard is rich. Now, she's of course, again, talking about not just the Colorado Supreme Court decision, but more specifically, the decision by Sheena Bellows, the Secretary of State of Maine, who's basically the state's top election official. This ruling came after the Colorado Supreme Court decision, and she said, "Listen, it's my constitutional obligation as Maine's top election official to determine whether or not a candidate is qualified to be on the ballot. I put Donald Trump on the ballot and it was challenged and I had to make a decision and I made a decision. And so I want to remind everybody of what that process is. So I'm going to play this clip of Secretary Sheena Bellows doing just that.
I think it's really important that people understand the process. As a general matter, states have the power to control their own ballots and in fact do under the Constitution. And Maine law specifically delegates to me as Secretary of State a requirement to review the qualifications for any candidate running for office. So for example, last week, the Superior Court found that my decision to bar Mr. Chris Christie from Maine's presidential primary ballot due to lack of signatures was lawful and correct. So my job, I qualify Mr. Trump for the ballot, and under Maine law, any registered voter can bring a challenge to that qualification. In this case, there were 3 challenges, and I was required by law to hold a hearing, an administrative hearing, to review the evidence, hear testimony, Both sides were represented by counsel. Mr. Trump was represented by an attorney, and then I'm required to issue a decision. That's my obligation under the oath I swore to the Constitution.
Again, relatively straightforward. You may not like the procedure or the process, but that's the case. I mean, again, I'll openly admit, I agree with the outcome. I agree with the procedure as prescribed in state law, but I am also sympathetic to the idea that it feels different when it is a court making a decision, these legal experts using, a bench trial situation and then being reviewed by the Supreme Court. Yes, I feel like that's more robust than a single partisan official making a decision. But a couple of things. That's the process. As Secretary Bellows points out, that is Maine's process. And nobody complained when she kept Chris Christie, a Republican presidential candidate, former governor of New Jersey, when she kept him off the ballot because under Maine law, he was not qualified to be on the ballot. That's okay. But the idea of enforcing a constitutional amendment, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, and applying it to Donald Trump, then Dagen McDowell and other right-wingers and MAGA cultists are freaking out because here's the thing. It's not about constitutional interpretation. Dagen McDowell is not a constitutional scholar. As we've discussed about, there is a weight, a tremendous amount of intellectual and credentialed weight behind the theory that Donald Trump is constitutionally ineligible. One such example, since Dagen McDowell also talked about judges, is a conservative judge, a former conservative judge, and constitutional scholar, Michael Luttig. Right? He has become an outspoken defender of this theory. And I just want to remind everybody, just in case anyone is persuaded by Dagen McDowell's idea that, any judge who rules like this doesn't deserve their seat on the bench.
What's your reaction?
Jake, thanks for having me on this evening. It's always a pleasure. The Colorado Supreme Court's decision yesterday was a judicial masterpiece of in constitutional interpretation.
That is a conservative, retired federal judge, a man who was widely esteemed by the Heritage Foundation and other right-wing think tanks and Republicans across this country. Somebody who's infinitely more credible than the likes of Dagen McDowell. And he's like, the decision to remove Donald Trump from the ballot because he's a constitutionally ineligible insurrectionist. Well, that's a masterpiece of legal and constitutional interpretation. But it doesn't align with Dagen McDowell's particular outcome. She is outcomes oriented here. And again, listen, I understand that. I get it. But I just love the hypocrisy of it, right? How dare this one person, Sheena Bellows, make a decision about the Constitution, but these other people, they need to make the decision about the Constitution that I, a person who has no legal background or constitutional scholarship, the position that I favor. Again, the double standard, right? It's when you have a different opinion or a different interpretation of the Constitution, I don't think that that is valid at all. It's not that I merely disagree with it. It's just you shouldn't even be in a position for that opinion to take effect. But I, another person who has a particular interpretation of the Constitution, yes, I am entitled to have it my way, right? It's typical Fox News standard fare, but the unhingedness with which Dagen McDowell delivered that tirade, that's unusual. And again, that's why I say, if you actually watch her content, she seems to be the most visibly unhinged of all Fox propagandists. I'll also add that it was recently reported, like within the past, 20 minutes, that Donald Trump is indeed appealing the decision by Maine, by the Secretary of State of Maine, and they are appealing it to a higher court system in Maine, right? So this is going through the process, and it's entirely possible that the Maine high courts, you say, you know what, actually, Secretary of State Sheena Bellows doesn't have the right to do this, right? There's a process with this. I hope it goes a certain way too, but Donald Trump has his options. So I just wanted to point that out. Again, the absolute hypocrisy of the Fox propaganda network on this, and the fact that it's contradicted by many conservative constitutional scholars and legal officials. William Bowd and Michael Stokes Paulson are two Heritage Foundation right-wing conservative scholars, and they wrote the literal law review, making the case that Trump should be kicked off from the ballot. So anyway, let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know, actually, also, if you think that there is a Fox propagandist more unhinged than Dagen McDowell, because I'd be interested to find out.